Let's talk about Charles Reynolds. He was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in the 19th century who, after a lot of reading and thinking, decided that he didn't really believe in any of that. And so he became a pretty famous free thinker who would travel around the U.S. giving lectures and passing out pamphlets describing why he found no evidence for the existence of God. In 1886, he came to New Jersey, which was, in retrospect, a bad idea, and delivered a lecture in a large tent. A big mob came and attacked him and destroyed the tent. Luckily, the police showed up, but it was only to arrest Reynolds on the charge of blasphemy, which was a law that had been put down in the books hundreds of years prior. The great freethinker Robert Ingersoll came to Reynolds' defense, and this quickly became the trial of the century. It was like the OJ trial, but 1887 and in New Jersey. The New York Times reported that for 6 months, no topic was so interesting to the public as this. And on the day of the trial, people were actually lined up outside the courtroom trying to get in, and those who couldn't get in gathered on the lawn outside the building. I'll include a link to the full speech below, but I wanted to read you an excerpt, and it was difficult to pick just a few chunks of what is a really fantastic speech, so go read it yourself. But no Orthodox church ever had power that it did not endeavor to make people think its way by force and flame. And yet every church that ever was established commenced in the minority, and while it was in the minority, advocated free speech. Every one. John Calvin, the founder of the Presbyterian Church, while he lived in France, wrote a book on religious toleration in order to show that all men had an equal right to think. And yet that man afterward, clothed in a little authority, forgot all his sentiments about religious liberty, and had poor serviettes burned at the stake for differing with him on a question that neither of them knew anything about. In the minority, Calvin advocated toleration. In the majority, he practiced murder. How has the church in every age, when in authority, defended itself? Always by a statute against blasphemy, against argument, against free speech. And there never was such a statute that did not stain the book that it was in, and that did not certify to the savagery of the men who passed it. Never. By making a statute and by defining blasphemy, the church sought to prevent discussion, sought to prevent argument, sought to prevent a man giving his honest opinion. Certainly a tenet, a dogma, a doctrine is safe when hedged about by a statute that prevents your speaking against it. In the silence of slavery, it exists. It lives because lips are locked. It lives because men are slaves. Where would we have been if authority had always triumphed? Where would we have been if such statutes had always been carried out? We have now a science called astronomy. That science has done more to enlarge the horizon of human thought than all things else. We now live in an infinite universe. We know that the sun is 1,000,000 times larger than our Earth, and we know that there are other great luminaries, millions of times larger than our sun. We know that there are planets so far away that light, traveling at the rate of 185,000 miles a second, requires 15,000 years to reach this grain of sand, this tear we call the Earth. And we now know that all the fields of space are sown thick with constellations. If that statute had been enforced, that science would not now be the property of the human mind. That science is contrary to the Bible, and for asserting the truth you become a criminal. For what sum of money, for what amount of wealth, would the world have the science of astronomy expunged from the brain of man? We learned the story of the stars in spite of that statute. Sadly, Ingersoll's great speech wasn't enough, and Reynolds lost the case. He was fined $75, which Ingersoll insisted upon paying. The judgment may have discouraged some free thinkers from speaking out, but luckily it didn't stop Reynolds or Ingersoll, who continued to be blasphemous until their deaths. So today is Blasphemy Rights Day, which is why I bring all this up. 6 years ago today, you might recall, a Danish newspaper published some comics that depicted Muhammad, and that inspired loads of people to protest violently, which led to hundreds of deaths. So, you can mark this occasion any way you'd like. You could, spread around some good anti-blasphemy law quotes on your Twitter feeds or Facebook pages. You could donate $75 to your favorite secular organization in Reynolds' name, maybe. That could be fun. But more than anything, I think you should just remember, and maybe take the time to remind others, that it shouldn't be a crime to hold and espouse opinions that differ from those of the world's religious fundamentalists.